Record to the cloud. Hello, friends. Shalom. I'm with my very good friend today for another episode of the Israel Bible Scholar Interviews, Ze'ev Orenstein. Shalom, Ze'ev.
Shalom, Tully.
We are good friends. We go way back, as they say. We went to yeshiva together in Israel after high school. And Ze'ev has gone on to do incredible things for the state of Israel, for the Jewish people. Ze'ev is the director of the International Affairs for the City of David Foundation, where he is responsible for strengthening awareness of and support for the City of David, the place where Jerusalem began, and the historic site of biblical Jerusalem, among those shaping public policy and opinion. To that end, Ze'ev works closely with the government officials, faith leaders, NGOs, members of the media. Ze'ev moved to Israel in 2003 and lives with his family in Ma'aleh Adumim, Israel. Ze'ev, what happened to you after we spent the year together? I guess you stayed in Israel, but how did you end up at the City of David?
The way I ended up in the City of David is a lot of providence. I finished the gap year that we were on together, and I grew up in New Jersey, and I went back to the U.S. to attend Yeshiva University for college. And I really didn't know what I wanted to do with my life, but one thing I knew was that I loved Israel, and I wanted to try and figure out a way to make a career of that. I didn't really want to be an accountant, a lawyer, a doctor, things like that. And I was very blessed that somehow Hashem heard those prayers, and ever since I graduated, which now is already, 20-something years or so ago, 20 years ago, I found myself in one position or another where the prayer that I had, which was a desire to strengthen the connection of people all over the world to Israel, that's what I get to do for a living. And for the last 6.5 years, I've gotten to do it for the City of David, the place where Jerusalem began, biblical Jerusalem. And I get paid to do what is something that I would probably pay lots of money to do, which is share the significance of Jerusalem, of its biblical heritage to leaders from around the world. And it's very humbling to be in a position like this.
Yeah, no, I feel the same way. And I remember you as, I guess, an 18-year-old, you were so committed to Israel, and what a blessing that you've been able to do exactly what you set out to do.
Yeah.
Okay, so tell us a little bit about the City of David in general. What's a lot of people are familiar with the City of David, but not everybody. So what's the City of David?
The City of David is biblical Jerusalem. It is the place where Jerusalem began. For many people, when they think of this book, and when they think of Jerusalem, the Jerusalem of King David, King Solomon, the prophets like Isaiah and Jeremiah, when they think of Jerusalem, for most people, they're probably thinking of the old city of Jerusalem. And that was the case for a very long time, except that Jerusalem is not actually, the Jerusalem of the Bible is not actually located inside the walls of the old city. Until the year 1867, when Queen Victoria of England, she wants to discover the treasures of the Bible, like the Ark of the Covenant. So she sends a man by the name of Captain Charles Warren to the Holy Land to find those treasures, and he comes to Jerusalem. And if you want to find the treasures of the Bible in Jerusalem, you'll go to the Temple Mount, the biblical Mount Moriah, where the binding of Isaac took place. And that's what Charles Warren does. And the problem is that the Ottomans, the Muslims, are there in 1867, and they say, Charles, you're not going to dig up the Temple Mount. To this day, there's been virtually no archaeological activity on the Temple Mount due to religious and political sensitivities. So Charles Warren says, if I can't dig on the Temple Mount, I'll dig near it. And he begins to make a number of discoveries, which leads him to the theory that the original biblical city of David, the place where Jerusalem began, is not located inside the walls of the old city, but is in fact located outside the walls of the old city. And over the next 150 years of archaeological excavation, it turns out that Charles Warren was in fact correct. And the City of David today is one of the most archaeologically excavated sites in the world. And we're on a daily basis, we are uncovering antiquities that are showing that our biblical heritage in Jerusalem is not simply a matter of faith, but a matter of fact.
Wow, I love that. That's and it's awesome. I've been there so many times, and every time I learn new things, and you're uncovering just groundbreaking discoveries on a regular basis, there's nothing like it on Earth. There's nothing like that on Earth. So let's talk about the sort of the very beginning, at least not the very beginning maybe of Jerusalem, but like some of the earliest things that you have found at the city of David that are mentioned in the Chumash, in the Torah, in the Bible, right? You found things that are even before King David, correct?
Sure.
And you found things after King David, but like tell us about, because we were talking a little bit before, and you were saying that some of the archaeology that you found has to do with the high priests, and that to me, as a Kohen, as a priest myself, I want to hear more about that.
So it's an amazing thing that I could speak for myself, that when we go through some of the passages in the Bible that deal with the service of the priests in the tabernacle, in the wilderness, and talking about the future temple, it's very easy when you get to those passages. It's sometimes harder to connect than when you're going through the book of Genesis or the Exodus story, or maybe in Numbers where you have, the sin of the spies and all the other stories. When you go through the second half of Exodus and into Leviticus, it sometimes gets a little bit technical and hard to connect to, which makes the discovery that we had in the city of David all the more special, because it takes a section of the Bible that for most of us, or some of us, it's sometimes a little bit challenging to imagine in a real way, and it brings it to life. And so about a decade ago, in an excavation in the city of David, it was excavating an ancient drainage channel, about 2,000 years old, going back to the end of the Second Temple period. A small golden bell was discovered. And the bell is actually in the shape of a pomegranate. And the archaeologist, Eli Shukrun, who discovers it, he immediately, after cleaning it off and realizing what he had discovered, he immediately thought of the Bible. He said, wait a minute. I've heard this somewhere, of having a golden bell in the shape of a pomegranate. And he opened up the Bible to Exodus chapter 28, verses 33, 34, when describing the garments of the high priest who would serve in the temple. It says that on the hem of his robes were small golden bells. It says in the Hebrew, pa'amon rimon, right? That it could either mean that the bell alternated, the golden bell alternated with pomegranate-shaped pieces of cloth, or that the golden bell was perhaps surrounded by these thread-like pomegranates. But either way, you have this golden bell found at the footsteps of the Temple Mount, along basically above where it was found would have been the pilgrimage road where the high priest would have been walking. And so when you're in the city of David, when you're in the place where the Bible happened, the words of the Bible come to life. The likelihood that this was a golden bell from the robe, perhaps of the high priest himself, I would say is quite high.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah, it says here in, like you said, Pa'amone zahav bitocham savi pa'amon zahav v'rimon pa'amon zahav v'rimon. So it mentions that it was made out of gold. And that is incredible, to be able to walk on the same steps that the high priest walked on, and all of the pilgrims when they were ascending to the temple in ancient Jerusalem. Now, just explain what else is, explain the pilgrimage road, because that's also a relatively new excavation.
So the pilgrimage road, it's an amazing thing, because if you go back to 2004, at the southern end of the city of David, there's a road. Beneath the road, there's a sewage pipe, and in 2004, the sewage pipe bursts, ruptures. Now,
Wow.
The city of David is not just another part of Jerusalem, and so here, when a sewage pipe ruptures, you don't only send in construction crews, you send in archaeologists. The archaeologists, in repairing the sewage pipe, inadvertently uncover a series of ancient stone steps, 2,000 years old, going back to the end of the Second Temple period. And they say there's only one other set of steps that look just like those And those are the steps leading up to the Hulda Gates, the southern steps going up to the Temple Mount. And they realized that there must be a connection. And they had discovered the steps leading down to the ancient Shiloach pool, the pool of Siloam, which we know from the Torah, from the Bible, that there are 3 times during the year when all of Israel has to go on pilgrimage up to the temple. We're talking about Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot, Passover, the Feast of Weeks, and Tabernacles. And before you can do that, one has to purify themselves. You have to go to a mikvah, a ritual bath. The historian Josephus says that 2,000 years ago, you would have had nearly 3 million people going on pilgrimage. So then the archaeologist said, if we know where the pool of Siloam is, the Shiloach pool, and we know where the temple stood on the Temple Mount, and you would have had on Passover, say, millions of people going on pilgrimage, how did everyone get from the pool all the way up to the temple, a distance of about a half a mile? So they widened the excavation, and what they're uncovering now is the literal, very same road that our ancestors, yours and mine, they walked on 2,000 years ago when they went up to the temple on pilgrimage, the actual pilgrimage road.
Wow. Wow. And in such close vicinity to the city of David.
It's going through the city of David. It runs from the Shiloach pool at the southern end of the city of David, the pool of Siloam, and it goes right up through the city of David, all the way up, coming out by Robinson's Arch, coming out by the Hulda Gates, the southern steps, literally the footsteps of the western wall of the Temple Mount. This is basically the biblical superhighway. This is the road that our ancestors walked on thousands of years ago when they were going up to the temple.
And when you show that to people, what is the response from Jewish or Christian pilgrims to Israel who are there maybe for their first time and, you know, didn't necessarily connect all of those dots until they're with you? What's their response?
What I could tell you is, one, those who get to see it are very lucky, because it won't be open to the public for another couple of years still, as the archaeologists are literally excavating around the clock right now. But when I do get to share it with people, you just see their eyes light up, in the sense that you're literally walking in the footsteps of the Bible. You're literally walking where our ancestors were thousands of years ago. And I say to them, when you think of the great wonders of the world, when you think of perhaps the pyramids in Egypt, the Colosseum in Rome, well, you go to see the pyramids today, you say, wow, look at what was possible 4,000 years ago. But where are the pharaohs today? They're gone, right? You can go to museums, history books. You go see the Colosseum in Rome. Where's the great Roman Empire today? Again, museums, history books. You come to Jerusalem. You come to the city of David. You walk along the pilgrimage road. And it's not just that this is a piece of history where once upon a time there was a Jerusalem and there were Jews here and they believed in the book called the Bible. You come to the city of David and walk along the pilgrimage road. It's the continuation of a story, because the people who walked on that road thousands of years ago are the same people who are going to walk on it in the future. The same people worshiping the same God, speaking the same language, having the same customs, traditions, and festivals as their ancestors did thousands of years ago. And where else in the world do you find anything like that? Truth is, you don't, right? You find it in Israel. You find it in Jerusalem. You find it in the city of David.
Yeah, it's hard to even not to take it for granted, because we grew up, you know, thank God Israel was always part of our lives. And even as, you know, young teenagers, we had the opportunity to spend, you know, time studying Torah here in Israel. But, you know, we take it for granted, and we don't realize that until, you know, recent years, recent decades, whatever it was. The state of Israel is 72 years old, or even the excavations that you're describing go back what, like 100 years old, something along those lines. But people have been really studying the Bible for thousands of years and didn't have what we have today, and so really needed a lot of faith to you know, to kind of, you know, maybe they believed in it, maybe they didn't believe that it was actually true, but we get to see it with our own eyes. And I think, what did you say before? An act of faith to
Right. It's not simply a matter of faith, but a matter of fact.
Right.
And we have in our tradition, I think, a very powerful teaching, which says that before God introduces a sickness into the world, he creates the cure. And you mentioned that, today we're very blessed to have all these archaeological discoveries, which literally you could open up the Bible and there are discoveries that, whether it's the names of figures from the Bible or inscriptions that affirm events that took place in the Bible, thank God there's no shortage of discoveries today that show that the biblical heritage of the Jewish people in Jerusalem and throughout the land of Israel is true. At the same time, I believe there's a reason why there have been so many discoveries over the last decade or so. If you go back 100 years and more, so much of the world, certainly the Western world, they believed in Scripture. They believed in the Bible. They believed it as the Word of God. Today, sadly, whether you're on university campuses or in the halls of the United Nations or elsewhere, that's not the world we live in anymore. And so I think whereas on the one hand, you have on a daily basis coming out of the United Nations resolutions denying Jerusalem's biblical heritage, at the same time, we have the cure, which is an unprecedented amount of nearly daily discovery in the city of David and elsewhere, showing that the biblical heritage is in fact true and can be affirmed. That the archaeology every single day almost is unearthing antiquities, fancy word for old stuff, that are showing that our heritage in Jerusalem, in the land of Israel, as described and recounted in the Bible, is in fact true.
Right. Yeah. So I think that's a really powerful point that you're making, that, perhaps God gave this discovery to our generation because we would need it to fight the heresy, to fight like the atheist, kind of mentality that has, really had a big influence, and the secularization of our society. And so God gave us this biblical archaeology because he knew that we would need some evidence, sort of like almost how in the biblical times there were miracles that took place because perhaps the people at the time needed that prodding or needed that testimony, whereas miracles have been taken away from us to a large extent, overt nature-breaking miracles. But God gave us, science, or God gave us archaeology in order to provide proof and evidence. And it's an interesting topic because a lot of people, look at biblical archaeology and don't come to the same conclusions or use it to prove that we didn't find evidence of the Jews in Egypt, and therefore, it's evidence that it didn't happen, right? But
Yeah.
you're saying that, God gave this to our generation. There's a powerful scripture that comes to my mind whenever I'm thinking about biblical archaeology or whenever I'm at the city of David, and that's from Isaiah 52, where the prophet says to shake off your dust and to rise up, the city of Jerusalem. And this is, the Haftorahs that we read at this time of the year, but also such a vivid imagery of shaking off the dust and the city of Jerusalem sort of reemerging from beneath the rubble of ancient history. And it's exactly what you're describing and what you're involved with.
We had, this gets out of the 5 books of Moses a little bit, but I was with a group of scholars, academics, in one of the excavations in the city of David, one that Dr. Eilat Mazar, who excavated there in 2005, believes could be the Palace of King David, but we'll save that for a different episode. But as I'm standing there in this excavation, sharing the findings, one of the professors instantly, raises his hand, and I'd spoken about how until 1993 there was no proof outside the Bible that King David existed. And then in 1993, in an excavation in Israel's north, in a place called Tel Dan, what's known as the House of David inscription was discovered, talking about a king from the House of David in the context of the conquest of King Hazael of Aram, who he himself was mentioned in the Bible. And so one of the professors says, well, hold on a second. He says, isn't it true today, that King David, he wasn't the regional superpower that the Bible makes him out to be. He was like a local tribal gang leader. He had a couple of followers, no big deal. He's nothing special. So I said to this group, I said, tell me something. I said, 30 years ago, what were we debating when it came to King David? And they said, whether or not he existed at all. I said, today, what's the debate? I said, the debate is, how big was his empire? I said, what does that mean? That over the last few decades, the archaeology has moved us more and more in the direction of affirming exactly what it says in the Bible. Of course, it was the King David. Today, almost nobody denies that. And now we're going to debate, how big was his kingdom? Some say it was bigger, some say it was smaller, and I promise you 10 years from now, we'll be debating something else because we'll know the answer to that. And in fact, the archaeology seems to be moving us more and more in the direction of, in fact, saying that King David had the kingdom laid out by the Bible, not just limited to Jerusalem. But the point is that, what was taken, that today we're debating how big was his kingdom, but we used to debate whether he existed. And archaeology is now showing we don't need to debate that anymore, that, the words of the Bible are literally coming to life. And it's exciting to be able to be in a place where we see that happening every single day. And it's a real blessing and privilege. And for everyone who really can come and see it for themselves, it's the kind of thing that, when you learn Bible, I grew up in New Jersey, you grew up in Columbus. When you learn Bible in New Jersey, when you learn Bible in Ohio, it's nice, it's great. But when you experience it in the place where it happened, it's just different, right? It literally comes to life. The words jump off the page. You say, wow, the reason why it says it like this is because, well, when I'm here, I understand the topography, I understand other things, but there's a reason why the Bible is written the way it is. And it's not something you always appreciate when you're outside of where the Bible happened.
Absolutely. And I just have to mention, I have with me the Israel Bible because that is the whole purpose of the Israel Bible. It's to help Israel jump off of the page. And I know that you have one in your home as well.
And one in the office, right? I have 2 copies of it.
Okay. That is, that's great. I know you spend a lot of time thinking about history, right? And thinking about the ancient history. But you're living in Israel, you're raising your family here in Israel. How do you see your work and the work of the City of David affecting the future of Israel in the future? Even again, like what Isaiah was talking about, this idea of shaking off the dust. What is the end game? The way that you see it?
It's very powerful to see Jerusalem come back to life after thousands of years of exile and destruction. And I'll share one daydream that I have that I think can perhaps answer the question in some way. One of the discoveries we have is a seal bearing the name of King Hezekiah. The King Hezekiah. It says on it, Hezekiah, son of Ahaz, king of Judah. It's a whole amazing story how that was discovered, which we'll save for a different time. But I had this daydream after the seal was discovered about 5 years ago, where the contemporary of King Hezekiah was the prophet Isaiah. And when the seal that was discovered with Hezekiah's name on it, that when it dropped onto the floor, so I had this vision that the prophet Isaiah turns to Hezekiah and says, that seal that you just dropped is going to be found some 2,700 years from now. And Hezekiah is like, okay, that's pretty cool. It's a long time, but all right. And he says, no, you don't understand. It's going to be found by your descendants, Jews.
Oh no, wait. We got interrupted. I lost you for 1 second.
So the seal, he says, is going to be found by your descendants. He says, all right, you're telling me, Hezekiah says to Isaiah, that they're going to be Jews in Jerusalem 3,000 years almost from now. And he says, I'm telling you more than that. The seal, which will be found by your descendants, will be found in Jerusalem, the capital of the sovereign Jewish state of Israel. And Hezekiah turns to Isaiah in this daydream and says, if not for the fact that you were a prophet, I wouldn't believe you. And that's the amazing thing, that you look at what has happened in Jerusalem over the millennia, and that here we are, so many thousands of years later, in the same Jerusalem, with many of the same challenges that our ancestors had. You know, when you look at the time of Hezekiah and Isaiah, Jerusalem was surrounded, threatened by Assyria, later by Babylon. We have no shortage of those who are challenging us today. But yet you look at what happened in the time of our ancestors, and just as they've endured, we'll endure. And the best days of Jerusalem are yet to come. And while we uncover the past, it's not just uncovering the past, but it is, again, the continuation of a story. This is not some ancient history of a people that doesn't exist anymore, but this is the continuation of a story that goes back thousands of years. And it's your story, it's my story, it's the story of our children, and the story of everyone who's watching this video right now. And that story is unfolding in Jerusalem, and it is going to be impacting the world for many more millennia to come, and we get to play a small part in bringing that story to life, and it's a big privilege.
That's great. That's great. Well, thank you so much for your time. How do people, obviously, who can visit City of David, they'll find you, they'll meet you at the City of David, but what about on the internet? How's a good way?
You can go to our website, cityofdavid.org.il, and then just do /EN for the English page. Facebook, you have City of David, Ancient Jerusalem. Between those two, you'll find everything you need to know about what's happening in biblical Jerusalem.
All right. Well, thank you, Ze'ev, and keep up the great work.
Thanks, Tilly.